Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Plan B Success. We have Sunil Godse with us from Ontario, Canada. Now, Sunil is a big believer in intuition. He believes that you should follow your intuition, for it decides what's right and wrong for you. And unfortunately, a lot of people doubt it and go through the process of self-analysis and self-doubt. And we'll talk all about that with Sunil. He's also the founder of Intuitionology and a writer of a couple of books. One of them is called Gut. So let's welcome Sunil and hear from him his story. Welcome, Sunil.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and happy to give my 2 cents on a very, very important topic.
So before we get into intuition, let's talk a little bit about you as a person. Your background. Where did you begin? What did you do prior to this?
So prior to this, I really kind of started the sort of South Asian narrative of doctor, lawyer, engineer, and obviously being the oldest son, I fell into that narrative, societal norms, so to speak. And even though, if I look at episodes of when I grew up, there were all these sort of spirits or episodic entrepreneurial type of things that I did when it came to sales or marketing. I mean, I can look back and now take a look at couching them in sort of business language. And I remember even at 5 years old, there was a set of video games that I wanted to buy, and my dad said they were too expensive. And so I had this voice clearly tell me to say that that's not what you want to hear, and you should go door to door to raise money. And so that's what I did. I had my little brother in tow, and we went door to door, and we raised $200. $100 went to my dad, and the other $100 went to charity that the school I was at was kind of doing, and I felt really good about that. And so that got me into a bit of trouble, because my dad is one who says don't bother other people. And then let's just say I couldn't sit down for probably about 15, 20 minutes. But nevertheless, my intuition was saying at that point, now I'd recognize it is that this is how it kind of operates and gets you to do things. And so I followed the societal norms. I actually wanted to become a pilot. I actually wanted to become a bus driver when I was really young, because what I loved about being a bus driver is that you collected money and you talked to people. And at that time, you dropped them where they wanted. I didn't realize there were bus stops when I was younger. And I said, wow, I mean, you get paid just to talk and let people hop off when they want. I mean, that's so ideal. But nevertheless, through my education, I took door number 3 and became the engineer. And I really didn't like it. The only aspect of engineering I really liked was when I was on a construction crew and kind of overseeing. So the management aspect of it is what I loved. But 2 years into that 3-year stint, I ended up becoming a part-time investor for a Mexican restaurant. And it was Senior Frogs, actually. It's the first Senior Frogs to come up in Canada. And we bought the rights to the name, and we opened it up in Calgary. And I was making 5 times more in dividends as an investor than I ever was as an engineer. And so something had to break. And the reason why I got into engineering was because I followed the Indian way. I didn't want to lose my relationship with my dad. And that had to break, because in the 3rd year, I just said, there's definitely a calling here. And I became the entrepreneur, sacrificed my relationship with my dad. That got me through a string of ventures in wholesale clothing, retail clothing, the restaurant business, pop-up events, entertainment. And I totaled about $20 million in revenues over several years before going on to the consulting route. And I wrote a book on Fail Fast, Succeed Faster, which is all about entrepreneurship and how you overcome failures by looking at the failures and hurdles of others. And so that started me on sort of a speaking tour. And one common question I used to get is that, what's the one thing that entrepreneurs can do to be successful? And at that time, I kind of rolled my eyes, saying, well, there's a whole reason why I interviewed 300 people and that there's 75 stories of failure or hurdles in my book, is because I don't think that there's just this one thing, until I started listening to the podcasts of the interviews I did. And pretty soon, 80 to 90% of them are saying some version of, I knew what decision I was, or I should have taken, and I ignored it. Or I had this gut feeling, or some version of that language. And when I tried to look at this thing called intuition, because that ended up being this common language, I really had to dig deep and find out, what is this thing called intuition? And why do we kind of ignore it? So that got me thinking about, okay, when did I ignore it? And there are three instances that immediately came up in my mind. The first one we talked about, which is going into engineering and picking a career that I just was not vested in personally. Mm-hmm. I had a management consulting contract where the contract terms kept changing. And my intuition is saying, don't take it. But this was a contract with very lucrative down in Silicon Valley with one of the top IT firms. And I said, oh man, this is an opportunity I can't miss. And I spent all my money going down there and they never paid me. And I came back up to Canada with 25 cents in my bank account. And the very last one was, I had a friend of mine who is being stalked and she needed some advice from me. And so she reached out to me and said, Sunil, I need your advice. And my intuition at the time was saying, meet with her that afternoon. And I said, I didn't have anything that afternoon. I said, let's meet a couple of days later. But unfortunately, the very next day, she was shot and killed. Oh, shoot. And I could have prevented that. And each one of those times, something was telling me what the right decision was, but I ignored it. And this is why I started gut. And this is why I started Intuitionology, to dig deeper and deeper and deeper to find out, why do we ignore intuition that start making bad decisions? And when we make bad decisions, we start wasting time in our lives because we can make the right decisions. And it's actually 2 times the cost. It's not just the cost of the bad decision, but it's also the loss of making the great decision. And so the cost is actually double.
So when did you start with Intuitionology?
Intuitionology was started 5 years ago. And it was really almost the second chapter of the gut book. The gut book looked at what intuition was and kind of how do you use it. But a lot of people didn't know how to apply it. So what I did is I took a look at, okay, what are the steps that are needed to take these components of intuition? Because at that time it's really complex. We have 4 types of intuition that all work together. We've got things called intuitive signals, both positive and negative. The positive ones obviously tell you which direction you should go in or what decision you need to make. And the negative ones are the ones that you shouldn't take. And also there's also 4 intuitive hurdles. So how do you take this mishmash of all these complex components and turn it into a process? And my whole Intuitionology project was to do that and to educate people on either what intuition is or how do they really use it. And one of the very first interviewees I had was a gentleman by the name of John Rothschild. Now this is an investment banker. Data was his decision. He did not get what intuition was because he thought it was very spiritual. As somebody who uses spreadsheets to drive his business and his life in terms of data and experience, I remember it's on the video. When we turn on the video, he says, I really wish I could meet those people who see omens. And I'm not sure intuition really plays into these decisions. But as I educate him on sort of the complexities of intuition, half an hour in, he starts telling me a story of when he goes against the data. And this ended up being one of the biggest restaurant chains under his portfolio. And then at the end of the interview, we talked about one of the biggest decisions that he made that was so crazy that other people thought he was nuts. And at this point, 1 hour in, he's really understanding what intuition is just by the nature of our interview and him telling himself stories and him kind of convincing himself. And he said he did. So what he said, this is an investment banker that was making, $3 to $4 million a year, private jets, high-end restaurants, limousines. And he traded that all off to run a tiny, bankrupt little restaurant. Everybody obviously is thinking he's crazy. Like, why would you do that? But he did. And his intuition led him to do that. And he did. And that tiny, bankrupt little restaurant was Eastside Mario's location number 1. And that ended up being over 1,000 locations over 20 years later, $2 billion in revenues because of an intuitive decision.
When you started on your journey of pursuing intuition and trying to understand it, researching it and all that, was there a trigger for you to begin with this?
So the trigger was really kind of taking a look at my experiences and really understanding, why did I make those decisions? And what was it about those things that really spoke to me in terms of, okay, one of the things I did realize is that there were things called signals that I said, that's interesting, because I knew what that decision was. Why did I ignore that? And then when I looked at all the different times that I ignored my intuition, there were all these signals that were very, very different. So it wasn't just one signal, like people often talk about this gut feeling or this voice, which is really common. But there were times when like the skin, the hairs on my skin just started standing up. And in fact, if you look at research that's done, they actually looked at the intuitive decisions that entrepreneurs make, and they found that intuition, when they measured things like skin conductance and heart rate, they found that intuition acted 7 seconds before they actually took an action or made a business decision. So clearly there were these things that were signals that were different. And what I also noticed is that when I made the right decision, it felt really differently than when I made the wrong decision. When I trusted my intuition, it really, for me, felt cathartic. The dots were connecting, open. And it was just an easy process to take that decision. And what I noticed when I ignored intuition is that intuition started really small and then got louder and louder as I ignored it. And pretty soon then, there's the ultimate signal where it says, I'm not going to let you ignore me anymore. And, for some people, it ended up being a car crash, or, wanting to kill themselves. And them saying that's the ultimate intuitive signal that got them to really kind of trust this thing called intuition and make decisions based on it. And so when I took a look at my experiences and I started interviewing 1,000 people more for my podcast series and just for the research on my Intuitionology project, there were a lot more signals and they were very unique. So one gentleman, he's an entrepreneur, and when we were doing the interview, he said, Sunil, you know what? I don't get signals. I don't know. I'm not sure, but let's get back to that question. And then when we started talking about his failures, every time he got into a venture where he really didn't enjoy it or he lost money, he kept grabbing his left earlobe. And 10 or 15 minutes in, he goes, Sunil, I just found out what my signal is. And he now recalls talking to his wife about the reasons why he shouldn't have got into those businesses or those ventures. And he remembers his left earlobe getting hot. So it could be that specific, or it could be general. And the other thing you have to be careful about is just because you have a voice, let's say, as a signal, and say that's a negative signal, how do you know that's the first signal versus the third signal? If it's the third signal that you've identified, what just that tells me is that there are 2 signals that you've ignored. And what that means is you're 2 decisions down. And if you're 2 decisions down, that could be an okay place to be in, or it could be in a situation that you regret. So what happens is you need to go back to say, okay, what was the second last signal and what was the first signal? What were those signals that were telling me? And so when you have this basket of positive and negative signals, and you take the time to find out what those inventory of signals are, now you know the next decision you make, there's going to be a signal that your intuition is telling you what the right decision is versus what the wrong decision is. And if you've got your signals right, you'll make the right decision 100% of the time.
So, one thing with people in general, right, irrespective of which age they are in. So we all want to do the right thing. We all follow a certain pattern in terms of how the world works. And there could be situations where like you said, intuition, right? So you don't like something or you dislike something, but you still go down that path out of societal pressures, out of just trying to convince your parents or because it's the right thing to do, because they believe it's the right thing to do, things like those. And, and you're bound to fail if you go against what you don't like or what you thought you would not be successful at, but you've done it for the heck of somebody else. But like you said, at some point it snaps and you come back and you start following what you truly should. So when it comes to intuition and when it comes to recognizing what you truly want to do, what's your belief when it comes to age patterns? Does it happen at a certain age for certain people, or does age have any bearing on this at all?
So I would say age is one. We're all born with intuition. And so one of the things from a scientific perspective, what happens is as we age, we've got over 100 billion neurons that are firing at 200 times a second. And it's soaking all the experiences around us that are relevant to us. So you're not going to capture everything. It's just what captures your intuitive attention, puts that in the subconscious area of your brain, and kind of stores it. And so when a decision comes up, it's going to use that experience that you've had in the past to bring up and inform the decision that you're going to be making. And so there's 4 types of intuition. The one I just described is called creative intuition. Mm-hmm. Now, it's based on experience. So clearly, the more experiences you have, the sharper and sharper and sharper you're going to get at trusting your intuition. And the more better you're able to listen to those intuitive signals, the better you're able to maybe move away from people who don't have your best intentions at heart. And typically, I fell into that trap with my dad, right? He had all the right intentions of having me in a very safe career. Perhaps he was looking at as a social status, but he never really actually asked me what I really wanted to do. It was all about, and if I wanted to go into, like I was computing very early in high school. I was actually separated from the kids who were just learning to turn on a computer, and I was here programming in Logo and Lisp. And I said, wow, I want to go into computers because I'm way ahead of the game and I love this stuff. And he said, well, in engineering, they're starting to use computers, and in medicine, there's things called robotics. So he was always there to steer me back to reshaping who I wanted. And I loved him, right? I mean, he's my father. And so you kind of drink the Kool-Aid, even though your intuition is saying that you don't. So as you age, you get better at understanding intuition, but it's also the environment. So if you look at my kids, for example, they're 9 and 14. And they roll their eyes when I talk about intuition because I talk about it all the time at home. So, but for my 9-year-old, when she was 7, she moved away from a bullying incident, and so did Avni, my eldest, at 12. She moved away from a bullying incident because her intuition was telling her that something was wrong with the way that these friends were behaving was not based up to her standards, her values. And Avni is now, based on intuition, she's running a nonprofit agency, a federal agency, where she's raising money for those with disabilities and illnesses through her selling of her art. And she's raised over $20,000, and her intuition drives that. Mm-hmm. So my wife and I give her the environment to understand what intuition is, tap into it, and really kind of drive her decisions. It's not going to be perfect. She's 13. She just turned 14. She's still young and becoming a teenager. So there's lots of ups and downs. But if you look at connecting the dots and the ups and downs, the trajectory is up. So part of what intuition does is filters the people around you to make sure that you really have the right people around you to educate you in, what career you want to get into. If you're a student, what angle do you want to go into? Is this, you may be in a certain path to education, but how will that help move you forward? And even if you go down the wrong path and you make a mistake, that's still experience that your intuition draws upon that's going to help you make other decisions. So I learned a lot through my engineering. I hated it, but I learned a lot of stuff about the management of it. I learned a lot about relationships on a construction site, and it could be a construction site, but how to get people that you want to do things for you, right? That's a great skill to take when you're a consultant. And so there's things that I drew from, even though there were bad experiences. But certainly filtering the people around you is one. Finding out what your signals are two. And really having that confidence that you take those decisions and you march forward with them, and not worrying about what other people think. It's your path. You should be okay going down that path.
It's said that, you are the sum total or the average of the 5 people that you spend your time with, right?
Right. Yep.
And so when it comes to that versus, and you can choose the kind of people that you want to spend your time with. Plus, then there's this whole gamut of experiences that are very personalized, that are very unique to you in your life. What impact do they have on your intuition?
They have a huge impact because if they are, now it all depends on what type of relationship you have with them. If it's a loose relationship, a cordial one, or sort of social one, that's one thing. But if they're part of your inner circle, you have an inner circle because they're part of your trusted environment. And so you're sharing a lot of thoughts and ideas. You're looking at their values. You look at how they conduct themselves. And you're also making sure that they're still trusted, right? Because what's going to happen as you go through life is you're going to get an ebb and flow of people as their values change. Maybe they don't trust their intuition. They get into something that goes against who you like to see as a friend. So as you see this ebb and flow of relationships coming in, what you're doing is you're also informing and you're seeing how they succeeded. What happened when they made decisions? Did they fail? So it's not only your experiences that you're seeing, it's also you're looking at their experiences that you're seeing, and you're also putting that in the subconscious area of your brain. So when you surround yourself with people who are really moving your life forward, or who are mentors that are going to move you forward, you want to make sure you pick the mentors that you know have the expertise, the advice that you can rely on and you trust, that actually move you forward. I mean, there's a lot of charlatans now out there on social media that are selling this and that and this career advice and take this venture. I can make you $1 million with social media. But a lot of times they've either done it once or they haven't done it. And this is where your intuition is, because you're going to be spending some time, effort, and maybe even money, trusting these people that they're going to move your life forward when they're not. And this is where your intuition is really checking upon what they say versus what they do. Do you trust the testimonials? You can see this happened with another fellow who was in digital marketing. For the longest time, he was the expert in digital marketing, and all of a sudden, he started doing these tactics that, in my opinion, were quote unquote beneath him. I think somebody advised him to get into some kind of sales funnel with a bunch of emails, and it really detracted away from the value of what he gave before. And that's unfortunate, because now people like myself who had him in high regard, now not necessarily, I'm just kind of wondering what happened to you, right? Because I would have paid you money for your advice. Now I'm not so sure. And so, again, this is where your intuition comes in, right? So there's that consistency initially, there's that consistency over time, and your intuition is picking up on small twitches. Do your actions match the words? What are the words being said? And it also uses a baseline. So, for example, if you're naturally an introvert or naturally twitchy, it's going to use that as a baseline. It's just looking for a detraction from that that's deceptive, or a detraction from that that's going to be saying that this is someone I can trust. And realize that it is an ebb and flow. People are going to come, people are going to go. I just recently lost, we moved away from a 5-year really close relationship with another family because, somehow their values changed and it became a one-sided relationship. And, intuition also gives second chances. But at some point I'm saying, why are we always, the ones giving into this relationship? I think we've lost the value in it. And this is where my wife and I kind of are a bit different. I'm pretty hard on this stuff. When I make a decision, that's it, right? And my wife likes to give third or fourth chances. And it's nice, I like the softness about her, but we start then wasting time trying to mend a relationship that I don't think my intuition is saying it cannot be mended. And so now I'm wasting time trying to be friends with someone that don't want to be friends with us. So why be friends, right? And ultimately, we lost the friendship, but it just means that I've got quality over quantity. And the friends that I have now are important for me, very important for me.
There's this dialogue about the inner voice,
Yep.
the inner voice in your head versus the inner voice in your heart, or you could even call it your inner voice in your gut, the second mind in the gut. Some people call it that. But back to what you talked about, which is being logical, being practical, being based on facts versus something else that doesn't really consider those facts but pulls you along in a different direction. And that's the confusion. People get caught up in, which direction do I go? So when you crystallize intuition, is this what we're talking about?
That's absolutely what I'm talking about. And so intuition is simplistically is a balance of the head and heart. You have the emotional side of things, and that has to be balanced with the logical or rational side of things. And from a scientific perspective, the first part that your neurons go through is the amygdala, where the emotional regulation is. And that's where that's where you start getting these feelings of where things are. And so after that, of course, within a split second, we're talking about 200 miles per hour, it's going to go through the rational part. But it's already made a decision, and it's taken into account some of the rationality to confirm it, all within a split second. And so what happens is when we're too emotional, then we start talking ourselves out of making a decision. Or if we're too rational, as businesses are, then they rely on the data too much, where they should be going somewhere else. And you absolutely need that balance, because sometimes the data is wrong, or sometimes the emotion is wrong. And this is where these signals are so important, is because when you're too emotional, you'll know every single person who's been in an abusive relationship knew either before they got into it, or they knew the exact moment where it turned south. They knew that exact moment, and they knew when their intuition was telling them to get out. And they continued on because they tried to convince themselves that this person will change, second chances. Intuition's already given second chances. And it has not seen an improvement in the behavior. Even though the words are there, even though the actions that they're trying to portray to you is one thing, but it looks at the whole theater of behavior. And if they're seeing something that's not in alignment, that's when you get the warning. And then again, with the data, same thing with John Rothschild, I told you with Eastside Mario's. So he would typically, in any franchise operation, as most franchises, he had a scale of 10, and a 9 out of 10 would be where franchise location would go in. And they look at traffic patterns, where they can turn, development, everything around that went into that numbered scale. And there was this one place which was a 5.5 out of 10 in Toronto. It was a dilapidated place. It's just like sort of the lower end of town. And there's no hope that anybody should put anything there. And he said, we're going to put the beer market there. And he did. And he turned they was used to something like a 500 square foot thing into a 3,000 square foot location. It's a brand new business model. People who used to just go have any type of beer, he wants to teach them about beer pairings and food. And so it was a nightmare. But his intuition and his partner's intuition said there's something there. And that was the most successful brand ever in their whole portfolio in 20 years because they went against the data.
Awesome. So under the Intuitionology umbrella, what all do you offer? What all do you do?
So with Intuitionology, obviously there's a free ebook, and the ebook then takes you to a 7-day challenge. And again, that's also free. And what the 7-day challenge says is, here's the components of your intuition that I'm going to teach you about. And there's a 7-step process that I developed that says, okay, here's how your intuition behaves. I'm going to show you how to focus it so that you can solve one problem. Pick whatever problem you want. And let me show you in 7 days how intuition is going to help you overcome the stuff that didn't work in the past and what's going to work now. And it's going to help you take action. Once you've got that one problem solved, now you have a template for how you should be making any decision. And once you've got that, you're happy to carry on there. If you want to dive deeper, I've got membership programs that people can sign up for if they want to look at how to solve more problems in general, or if they want a deeper dive into their intuitive capabilities. And we've got things like 4 hurdles that we talk about: ego, fear. We talked about being too rational and being too emotional. Those 4 hurdles are big problems and they squash your signals. So if you want some more help in figuring out how to uncover those, then the membership program is the way to go there. But you don't necessarily need that. You've got the template for the 7th step. You use that each and every single time with every single decision you make. Then every decision will always be the right one.
And you mentioned 2 books, right? What's the second one?
So Fail Fast, Succeed Faster was the first one. And that was the one about learning from the failure of others. And Gut is the second one. And Gut dives down into the research that I found, the MRIs, and case studies of people so if I have an intuitive concept or intuitive component, I have an explanation of it. There's a case study of someone or a couple that demonstrate how that is in real life. And then I go on to the next component. So you really get a good view of theoretically what intuition is and practically how it actually applies in people's lives and the decisions they make.
And your podcast series, can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So the podcast series was one that I wanted to talk about to see how others defined intuition, to see how it approached theirs. They're really kind of life stories. So, for example, the podcast coming out today is with Larry DeLucas, who is one of the spaceship that went up in the space shuttle. And intuition was an integral part of him becoming an astronaut and opening the doors of opportunity. One of my very first guests was a friend of mine who almost died from COVID-19. And he was actually at the life or death moment. He wanted to die. And he had heard me speak about intuition before, which really crystallized it for him. But the way that it behaved was at that life or death moment. And he quickly realized what intuition meant because it had him live. And so these are the type of guests that I have on there. And they're from all walks of life. They've got influencers. I've got Nelson Mandela's grandson, Ndaba Mandela, who's coming up on podcast number 100. So I'm saving that for that. But there's some influencers and people from all walks of life on how intuitions helped them make the decisions that they did. What happened when they ignored their intuition, and I had people become homeless, want to kill themselves, get into trouble, to how they got out of it, and what were the decisions they made. what were the signals, what were the intuitive moments, and really taking a deep dive into understanding how intuition played a role in their lives.
Awesome. So Sunil, where can people find you?
So lots of places. There's Intuitionology.com, and they can grab the ebook from there as well. Go to the 7-day challenge. My podcast series is Intuitionology.com/podcast. I'm on all the social channels: LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. I'm on Clubhouse now. So I've been contributing there, and so being added to rooms to talk about intuition. And my email address, sunil@sunilgodse.com. So you can send me a DM or send me an email. Happy to answer some questions.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Sunil, and walking us through what intuition is all about and your work in the space of intuition. Before I let you go, one takeaway for the listeners, anything that you'd like to advise them of or share with them.
Absolutely. So the best way to look at your intuition is look back at the decisions that you made, good and bad. What did it feel at that moment? Those are your intuitive signals, and you keep doing the same thing until you keep getting the basket of signals that are positive and negative. Once you've got that inventory, every decision you make after that, there's a signal associated with it. Once you recognize it, you know what decision is to make. And that's what stops you from wasting time making bad decisions, because in that same time, you're making the right decision. And that's how you accelerate your success in whatever area of life that you choose.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and hope to keep in touch.
Thank you very much.
Hey, I hope you liked that episode. Please do check out Plan B Success Podcast on your favorite listening platforms. It's also available on www.planb.live. If you're looking to learn how to podcast and learn everything there is to ideate, create, launch, and monetize a podcast, do get in touch through the website www.planb.live, and I'll be more than happy to help. Thank you very much.